Well, thanks so much for inviting me here tonight. My name is Catherine Sandy. I'm the current president of the Overland Park Neighborhood Association, which our boundaries are Mississippi on the north, Yale on the south, Broadway, and South Platte River Drive. Our neighborhood is probably one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. Grand Frontier Park used to be called Montana City, and it was the first Anglo settlement in the city before Denver in 1858. It was the first Placer gold strike. The first airplane taking off and landing in Denver happened at the golf course, which used to be a racetrack. And we also have the distinct honor of being one of the first neighborhoods to have a radioactive Superfund site buried in our neighborhood by Citigroup. I just wanted to give a quick overview of the Shattuck site. From 1920 to 1980, Shattuck Chemical Company on 5.9 acres had been a major mineral processor in the region since the early 1900s. On-site operations had included extraction of molybdenum and vanadium from ores, processing of radium slimes and rhenium, which is a byproduct of molybdenum. And the primary constituents on the property are radium, thorium, uranium, molybdenum, arsenic, selenium, and assorted organic compounds. Shattuck ceased operations in 1984. It's currently, or was owned at that time, by Solomon Brothers, which was ultimately bought up by Citigroup. In 1983, Shattuck was placed on the national priorities list along with 30 other properties known collectively as the Denver Radium Site, and they were all located up and down both sides of the Platte River at that time. Soils at the Shattuck and the railroad lines directly west of the area are contaminated with radioactive materials and organic and inorganic materials. Residential yards, domestic wells, and the groundwater below the site were all contaminated. In 1983 to 1989, the EPA awarded a grant to the Colorado Department of Health to conduct a remedial investigation and a feasibility study to identify the types and the various quantities and the locations of the contaminants, and to develop a way to address the 50,000 cubic yards of the contaminated soils that were on the site. In April of 1991, the Colorado Department of Health issued a proposed plan for Shattuck cleanup. It stated in their proposed plan that Colorado Department of Health announced that the preferred alternative was excavation and off-site disposal, clearly chosen over an on-site encapsulation. Based on the overall comparison of the criteria, Alternative 6, which was to excavate and remove, was proposed as the preferred alternative for this site. Public comment was invited from 1991 through April of 1990, or from March of 1991 to April of 91. We had 30 days to comment on this. The Overland neighborhood supported 100% the preferred alternative of excavation and removal. And a 150-page criticism of the proposed plan was immediately submitted by the law firm representing Shattuck, which was John Fott and Associates. In January of 1992, well, first off, when the EPA came to our meeting that we had organized in April of 1991, they had come with open arms and smiling faces and had really asked us for our concerns and what we wanted to have them do with the site. While we were preparing for the meeting, setting up tables and chairs, it was not aware to us at the time that the chairs we had put up at the table were a little too short. And as it ended up, the EPA people were sitting about chest level at the table, so that it I don't know, became kind of humorous to us because they looked like a bunch of little kids sitting at this tall table, you know, with their arms up. But they left that meeting smiling and shaking our hands and thanking us for our input and our desires. And then in 1992, without further public comment or input, the record of decision was issued by the federal government mandating on-site burial, a decision strongly favored by Shattuck and reiterated in the 150-page criticism by their law firm, the total reversal of the preferred alternative that we had hoped that we would get. In 1994, the city issued a cease and desist order for Shattuck for violating the city's zoning ordinances by attempting to bury radioactive waste within the city limits. Shattuck is only 4 miles from downtown Denver. Shattuck appeals to the city zoning board, who rules in favor of the city. And then EPA turns around and sued the city of Denver in order to protect the supremacy of the ROD, the record of decision. In November of 1996, a U.S. federal court and the EPA sues the city and county of Denver. The presiding judge rules in favor of the EPA, citing that the federal government's supremacy is over all local laws. At that time, our neighborhood formed a group called ONU, Overland Neighborhood Environmental Watch. We began holding meetings and making phone calls and protesting and talking to everybody that we could. And ONU was born after receiving our first grant from the EPA in 1996, and it was $50,000, which allowed us to hire environmental experts to educate us about our site and to understand everything that was there and the procedures needed to help us start to hope to get rid of it. This was from our grant administrator, Deb Sanchez, who passed away about 6 years ago from ovarian cancer. And she had written, ONU was born from receiving the first grant from the EPA in 1996 and was formed by 5 women who I have been honored and proud to work with. I'm sure that the attorneys for the company, which was Citigroup, and the agencies looked at us humorously at first because we were a nurse, a secretary, a massage therapist, a hairdresser, and an antique book researcher. These women not only felt a great responsibility to our community and our homes and families, but we also felt a distinctly sacred responsibility to protect the rest of the living systems of the earth that would be greatly affected by this waste. We often talked about where the pollution was going, not only being blown around our neighborhood and our city, but also being carried into the Platte River, into the farming communities of northern Colorado and Nebraska. Farmers would use this water to irrigate crops that we could be eating later. There was always an awareness that the pollution that we create is not created in a vacuum. She says, I was searching for a name to incorporate our nonprofit under, and I wanted something that would sound appropriate as initials, ONU, Overland Neighborhood Environmental Watch. Some of our partners and spouses suggested the Overland Neighborhood Advisory Group, which came out to be ONAG. And 6 women didn't think that was really too good. So ONAG, which might have been appropriate one way, wasn't in the spirit of what I wanted to impart, Deb said. Our intention was to have a new outcome, a new vision for our community, and that one that we had been saddled with by the EPA and the company. We didn't want to be a radioactive waste dump for the next several thousand years. From 1996 through 1998, we watched the company bury and encase the waste in concrete in the middle of our neighborhood. We marched, we wrote, we called, we rallied, we met, we ate, we cried, we screamed, and we prayed. By the time others had joined our battle, other neighborhood organizations and other groups of neighbors who formed their own coalitions came to the surface. Because of our grant money from the EPA, ONU was not allowed to lobby or litigate. So we left those avenues up to another group called Clean It, Citizens Loving Our Environment and Neighborhoods Invincible Together. And that was formed by Jack Unruh, Bob Sperling, and Tom Anthony. In 1998, we found that the EPA had failed to consider that the Shattuck toxins might be contaminating the Denver aquifer. Also in 1988, an EPA official made the mistake of telling one of our neighbors to sit down and shut up during a press conference, and that's when Senator Wayne Allard got involved in our effort. From that point on, we suddenly had everybody's attention. Senator Allard argued for EPA Assistant Administrator Tim Fields to come out here from Washington, and he also requested the EPA Ombudsman Robert Martin to get into the matters. And what followed was a year-long schedule of meetings and negotiations and public hearings that went on monthly for 6 months. We met with Assistant Administrator Fields from Washington, representative from the owners of Shattuck Chemical, Citigroup, EPA Region 8, the Denver Mayor's Office, the Denver Department of Environmental Health and their representatives, Governor Owens at the time, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and there were 3 public hearings with Senator Wayne Allard, Mayor Webb, and Congresswoman DeGette. In June of 2000, Tim Fields flew into Denver and signed a removal order for the waste at Shattuck Chemical Company, and it was the first time in the 30-year history of the EPA that a signed record of decision was changed. And we effectively became the first community in the country to force the removal and overturn a Superfund site. And we're very, very proud of that. The site is now clean, although the current developer that has ownership of it has turned it into somewhat of a storage yard dump site, which is a little frustrating at this point. But we are very proud of all the hard work that we've all done. And for me, it was 18-year investment. Deb Sanchez, our grant administrator, was in it for 20 years because she lived right across Santa Fe on the south side of the golf course. So she was directly impacted and directly downwind from the site. And we bless her for, her inspiration and her guidance. She finally was able to become an ordained minister before she passed away. And her mantra was always, feed them. If you have food, they will come and they'll calm down and they will listen. And we were such opposites back then. She was calming and feeding people, and I was yelling and screaming and carrying on. And towards the end, we traded places, where she started getting, angry and upset, and I was the one calming people and trying to make the situation a little better. We had a letter from Robert Martin, who used to be the National EPA Ombudsman, and he was pretty much kind of relieved of his duties after he came to us and helped educate us further so that we got to that tipping point, being able to overturn the site. The EPA apparently no longer needed his services, but he says, I send my greetings and best wishes to the Shattuck citizens and to Senator Allard and Representative DeGette. Thank you for your invitation to attend the celebration. And that was in November of 2006. That was when the site was finished being cleaned up. He said, I really wanted to be there with all of you, but I'm a campaign manager for my father's campaign for sheriff, and I can't leave him so close to the election. My thoughts and my heart will be with all of you on Saturday morning. Remember, it's always a journey to truth, and the journey continues. Strength and bravery to all of you from the Makah Nation. Robert Martin, former EPA National Ombudsman. And I'm proud to show the final closing document, which shows that our grants were paid out, we succeeded, we won, we got the site overturned. Normally a neighborhood only gets $50,000 to hire people, and we ended up with $305,000 in grant money, which is what led to our success in making this happen for our neighborhood. We got an award from the Clean Water Action for our efforts, and reviewing all of this documentation after 18 years it was like one of those events where you see in the movies where the person is standing still and everything's swirling around them. And I'm down in my basement and I'm going through files and I'm looking at these documents, and all of this 18 years started coming back, and it was like, oh yeah, oh no, oh yeah. So it was my pleasure to be able to come here and just give you a brief overview of what our neighborhood went through and what we accomplished and our victory. What happened after all of this was done, we ended up being awarded $1.7 million from the Natural Resources Damages Funds, and we met with our Attorney General and some head people from the other agencies, and they formed a board of trustees and to oversight the money, which we then opened up to the Greenway Foundation to be able to use to garner matching funds. And the money was commingled, and it's being used for the river to roll back the banks and clean it up and fix up the riparian habitat and fix up the river itself. And so that kind of leads us into our next presentation. Yes?
I'd like the group here to thank you for the incredible work and diligence that you spent on it. I know that hours were incredible. And to just stand up in the face of federal governments, respected engineering firms, huge Wall Street banks, it's just an incredible story, and I think you deserve a round of applause.
people, you know, so many, at least more than 24 who were involved. I just happen to be the loudmouth. So, but thank you so much.
Does anyone have any questions for Catherine that you know, anything that in her presentation didn't cover that you guys want to know more about?
I have a question.
Yes.
Did Shattuck do things really improperly, or is the process that inherently messy?
Well, you know, it goes back to, you know, David and Goliath, where we're a low-income neighborhood, and that's the way they work, is they can come and dump, bury, and burn in the low income because they don't feel that we have any recourse. But they didn't count on that in our neighborhood. They didn't expect us. In fact, the city group pulled credit reports on all 6 of us women to find out who we were. Ooh, you know. But when it started out, it was kind of like an engineering nightmare with no engineer. And, you know, getting that money, getting the grant money over and over and over, and being able to educate ourselves more and more and more. We got to a point where the EPA had one young woman, Rebecca Thomas, who was like in charge of the site to begin with. And we ended up knowing more than she did. So we requested that she be replaced, because it was awful trying to, you know, handle somebody like that when you were more educated than she was. And we were on them all the time, you know, during the cleanup, you know, they created a monolith. They mixed the 50,000 cubic yards with fly ash, which is radioactive in itself. It's a byproduct of burning coal, and Portland cement, which the cement was compromised by the dirt and the other stuff, so it had no tensile strength. And they created literally a Mayan pyramid with steps, which I found very ironic, and covered it with synthesized bentonite, which they said once they got it wet, it would stay wet in perpetuity. Even this color knows better than that. And then covered it with rocks and declared it protective of human health and the environment forever. So, but yes, people, you know, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is funded by us, you know, at one point I referred to them as the Experiment on People Agency. They need to come in and look at who's there, how we're living. You know, we were told not to plant gardens because of the uptake capability of plants to absorb contaminants, and you know, not of course mess with any of the water. No new wells could be drilled, and so yeah, it's very important for the agencies to come in that are beholden to us, so to speak, and talk with us and find out what happens. Although, you know, we found out pretty quick. They came in smiling and turned around and did the complete opposite. Yes.
Being the enterprising group that you are, when are you going to sell the movie rights to this?
Where's Freddie?
It was so funny. I was invited to a presentation during that time. I forget now where it was, downtown somewhere. And Jim Hanley was there. He was the site manager at the time. And then there was a gentleman from Department of Environmental Health. And these young scientific women came up to me afterwards. And they're all in their little blazers and stuff. And they said, "Oh, you're just like Aaron Brockovich." I said, "Not really." So yeah, it all kind of happened right about that same time. That movie came out, not too far after that. So it was pretty interesting. There were so many things that happened, so many like interesting little stories during the 6 months of meetings and stuff that we had to go to. They brought in Ellen O'Brien, who was in-house counsel for Citigroup at the time, and every month she would come and she would sit at the table slathering on lotion and putting in eye drops. "Oh, it's so dry here. Oh, it's so dry. Oh my, oh." And I was so offended at that, because she was distracting from the meetings and she was distracting from what needed to be talked about. So, being the honorary self I was back then, at the next meeting I brought lotion for all 6 of us women, and we sat there and put our lotion on, and she left the room crying. So